The following is a look at the killers of Dead by Daylight and any real-world equivalents they might have. Let's continue. Sally Smithson, aka The Nurse. So yeah, Claudette's pants. Can she wear sexy underwear or not? It's one of the great questions of our time. Perhaps there are many Claudettes over the multiverse. Do they share this realm of the entity? Perhaps as alternative versions of the same person? Maybe, maybe not. Greater philosophers than me have not found the answer. But here we do find a supposed inconsistency in the lore of Dead by Daylight's most competitive killer. The Nurse's tome lore and her base lore overlap in a somewhat similar manner to Hillbillies, as opposed to being two separate stories, as with the Trapper and Wraith. But the problem with the Nurse is... we'll get to it. Smithson's early lore started out idyllic and peaceful. She lived a quiet life with her husband Andrew, building their dream house and wanting children of their own. Cruel fate took her husband away from her via a logging accident, and unable to support herself, she finds work in the only place she can, the dreaded Crotus Pren Insane Asylum. Her treatment at the hands of the staff and patients was cruel and chronic, and resentment built up inside of her. Apparently she had worked at the asylum for about 20 years before that night. She killed them all, patients and staff alike. At least 54 people were killed by Sally in a killing spree that's hard to imagine. How the victims were killed isn't clear, but however many were strangled to death, and it takes a lot of strength to strangle someone to death, let alone several dozen over one night. Sally was found after the massacre at Crotus Pren unresponsive. She was taken by an ambulance crew, but that ambulance crashed. The crew were found dead, probably killed by Sally, bringing her body count to around 60, maybe. And she was never seen again. One theory as to why she did it was that she had suffered some kind of psychotic break and went mad after years of hardship at her job. Another theory is a depressive snap resulting in a pugilistic variant of going postal. Another interpretation is that she came to the conclusion that the best thing for the residents of the insane asylum was to kill them all, killing being a kindness. Perhaps it's a combination of these three factors. But this isn't what the eventual tome lore said. To cut to the end, the spree was more inspired by eugenics and seeing the mentally ill as being unworthy to live, it being better for society as a whole for the weak to be purged. This isn't madness or a sudden break. This is deliberate planning to cleanse the asylum of undesirables. It's premeditated murder, and not what many players had envisioned for this killer prior to the tome's release. The secondary character in the Nurse's tome was called the Broken Woman, and proves to be a bad influence on Sally, telling her all these theories and ideas. Words such as science and gene pool are thrown around. A former nurse herself, it was the Broken Woman that put Sally on the path to eugenics. This likely dates the story somewhere in the early 20th century, but like with the previous three launch killers lore, I can't settle on a date. possibly even late 19th century. Eugenics was a popular idea before everyone realised what it really leads to. I tried to have a nuanced reading of the tome. Was Sally really corrupted by this philosophy? The part with the anxious girl's lice in her hair would suggest so. Insects and vermin are often invoked when talking about cleansing. But at first I thought Sally only killed the broken woman and not the others, at least not yet. But it does seem like the massive murder orgy was that very night, and the broken woman was just the first. There always was an insight into Sally's sadness and madness with lines like, "It's not her that confine the insane, but the insane who confine her." But the tome suggests this murder spree was all about hate, not psychosis. The tome makes references to the catatonic boy, sweaty codger, anxious girl, bad man, rancid son, foul girl, and others. This suggests this was the very night of the attack, but it's possible many of them are simply long-term patients, and Sally simply killed the broken woman however long before her main spree. But I think I'm just making up excuses, my own headcanon obstructing what's written right in front of me. There is such filth that permeates the asylum. If she is to cleanse it all, she had best begin. Perhaps some players could simply regard this as a retcon, or was I and several others just too invested in the base lore? It was never about sympathy, but contempt. I don't know, I simply don't know. Maybe it's just another dimension. What I'm a little bit savvier on is true crime, and one case really stands out. Richard Speck was a rampage killer that stabbed and strangled 8 women to death on the same night in 1966. Even more striking is that these victims were nursing students. The lore of Sally Smithson feels like an inverse of this true crime case, so I classified the nurse as a rampage killer. I've had a lot of difficulty finding precise definitions of spree killer, rampage killer, and mass murderer. By comparison, serial killer is easy to define, but the nurse is almost certainly one of the previous 3. But if we were to take the interpretation that the nurse really was a serial killer, as opposed to one night of murder, and the broken woman was simply her first victim over however many years, we have a lot more real-life cases to draw comparisons to. The big 3 are Donald Harvey, Charles Cullen, and Harold Shipman. All 3 of them worked in the medical profession to some capacity, and all 3 of them claims their killing was done out of kindness. But few believe them. They are not compassionate people. They are angels of death that loved the feeling of power over their vulnerable victims. Defenders of the sympathetic portrayal of the nurse point out the caress at the end of her memento mori. It's tender and soft, showing that, in her broken mind, she really does see murder as a kindness. But imagine Shipman stroking the face of the elderly victims as he injected them with a lethal dose of diamorphine. Imagine Cullen or Harvey caressing the head of one of their many victims after they die. This caress could well just be a sadistic taunt of a depraved killer, or just a further way of asserting their power. Do we assume better for the nurse because she is female? Smithson is the first female killer, and it's fitting she's a nurse because nursing is the most popular career choice for female psychopaths. And from psychopaths come serial killers. Elizabeth Wetlafer, Vicky Dawn Jackson, Kirsten Gilbert, Beverly Allett, and most recently, Lucy Letby. I didn't cover most of these in the project for various reasons, but what I do know of each case doesn't match with what happened at Crotus Pren at all. These serial killers typically targeted the very old or the very young, not the mentally ill, and not as some kind of eugenic-fueled mission. But again, I don't think a single case inspired this example of fiction crime. The nurse's add-ons are trinkets from the people she killed. Is this akin to keeping trophies? I'll tag that for now. And let's bear in mind that Harold Shipman kept trophies from many of his victims. The nurse is so far the only killer in Dead by Daylight to do this to a great extent. The nurse has been the undisputed champion of Dead by Daylight since her introduction in the first DLC, The Last Breath, in August 2016. The broken S-tier killer everyone fears when they get to the high ranks, or high MMR these days. Why? She can teleport, blink, through almost every defense survivors have and achieve incredible pressure very quickly. I remember her old add-ons and they really were broken. 6 blinks? Yeah, that was a tad excessive. Most have been completely reworked and the blink ability has been given a small cooldown to slightly clip her wings. I remember many saying that this was the end of the nurse. I'm sure many more would say chance would be a fine thing. The ability is called Spencer's Last Breath, from the warden at Crotus Pren, Patrick Spencer, one of Smithson's many victims and supposedly the strongest. I'm not clear how this allows her to teleport through walls, but this kind of thing is an intriguing mystery, an unknown element. Many of her add-ons are also just last breaths, but since the rework most of them are a bit crap. The worst offender being Spasmodic Breath, which is actually worse than anything the Hillbilly can show. And that's a good comparison. I'm okay with the nurse tweaks, whereas with Billy I think they went too far, but luckily he's been put back in the upper tiers. Every once in a while I used to get a match where a nurse would just flatten everyone at 5 gens. Fine, I didn't want to pip anyway. But when I tried to do it, and believe me I tried, I just can't master her. Some people have an intuitive grasp on this character and can use her like a true killer. I'm not like that. Yes, some of you have mastered this beast, and I'm happy for you. Really, I am. So very happy. Happy for you. Good for you. I did eventually learn a few new tricks, and the week before the changes were brought in I used up all the add-ons I had, including the legendary Omega Blink build. I still can't believe she launched as a 115%, i.e. 4.6 meters per second speed killer. It was before my time, but it was most definitely the Dark Ages. I probably would have sucked back then. Thank God for Wesker. But I still had some good matches as old Sally Smithson. But after months of not playing DBD at all to years of playing as other killers, I lost what little skill I had and am back as a baby nurse, staggering about the map and bringing the average kill count to less than 2. You're welcome. One last question I ask is, what are those corpses hanging from the roof of the burned down Crotus Pren Asylum? Surely Smithson didn't hang her victims from the rafters. Or is this the entity's interior design choice? Another question is, did Sally burn Crotus Pren down? There's no mention of arson or even fire in either the base lore or tome, so I won't tag her as an arsonist. The asylum was probably torched later, like H.H. Holmes's so-called murder castle. Maybe. Probably. I sure hope you're not fed up of me saying, I don't know yet.